Welcome to the Becoming Body Smart podcast, where we unlock the secrets of sustainable health and fitness and help you master your health habits. If you're tired of quick fixes, generic blueprints, and chasing short-term results, you're in the right place. It's time to become Body Smart.
So welcome everybody, and today we wanted to talk about food and nutrition and injury. So how your nutrition can lead to injury if you're not taking care of your nutrition. And so, important topic. Nutrition is always a tricky topic for everybody. It's one of the topics that we tend to get the most questions about because it's one of the harder things to balance. It's definitely for all of us a tricky subject because food tastes good and the standard American diet is not so healthy anymore and leads to a lot of potential pitfalls if we're not careful. And so we want to talk about how we can use nutrition to help benefit our body and avoid injury and some of the pitfalls that we can have if we don't pay attention to our nutrition in becoming injured. So
I think one of the reasons that this area is so fraught is, one, there was just some the way that nutrition science was done for a lot of the 20th century it just wasn't as rigorous as it could have been, and so
it was bad in some way. Like some of the research is just bad.
Yeah,
it's hard. It's a hard thing to study well because you either rely on people's reports of what they ate, which
we're notoriously terrible at.
Right, yeah. Or you put some people on specific diets and follow them, and those types of studies are very expensive, and then adherence is poor.
Yeah.
Like people don't stick with that because it's hard to live a very strict diet and live a quote unquote normal lifestyle, especially an experimental diet.
Yeah.
And so you don't get long-term outcomes with it.
Yeah. No, I think those are great things to say. And then it comes back to this ideal versus real life, and it's easy to talk about this is what our food choices, this is maybe the healthiest options and what's going to help us to perform the best, but then we've got to do that in the context of not our own environments in life, but our own individual bodies, right? The differences in muscle mass, in how much we just fidget or move around, differences in our hormones, how good, what's the quality of our gut microbiome, how much are we absorbing, etc. All of that plays into what we actually get out of the food that we take in. And so I think that's an important thing to remember in all of this, is that there's, yes, these general principles, but what does it actually look like when we apply it to our life? And so I think this goes to this first point that we want to bring up, is focusing on, can we get the big building blocks in?
Yeah, the building blocks are one of the more important parts. Essentially the reason why we eat is to get the building blocks to maintain the health of our body, right? And so there we talk about macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients being carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Those are some of the main building blocks, as well as some of the main energy sources to fuel our body. So the proteins help they help kind of drive the processes of the building up, and a lot of our tissues are made or are densely interwoven with a lot of proteins and things like that. But it's also proteins that perform some of the actions that help build up our bones and tendons and ligaments and all those things. And so protein's really, really important. Fats, really, really important for cognition. Actually, fats are really important. A lot of our brain is sheathed in fat. And so
all our cell membranes.
yeah, all our cell membranes use a lot of fat. All types of things where lipids, or what fats are called scientifically, lipids are used throughout our whole body. So very, very important. And yet for 40, 50 years, 60 years, we vilified fat as the enemy. It's even longer than that. It's probably 70 years. Started in the 50s.
It's always funny because I think of the 50s, I'm like, oh, that was like 50 years ago.
Right.
But it's not.
Nope, it is no longer 50 years ago. That's wild. But yeah, so yeah, going on, we're just barely starting to realize, oh, fat's not the problem. There was actually just a landmark study released this last week about statins and about cholesterol, and how cholesterol's role in heart disease is actually pretty minimal. How it really only in the presence of high blood sugar is cholesterol a problem. And so as long as we keep our blood sugar low, it's not that big of a deal. And statins cause more problems, it turns out, than they solve. So consult with your doctor, all those things. I'm not saying stop your statins or things like that. Got to be careful with that. But yeah, they're definitely more downsides than positives to statins. So you got to be careful with what you're taking. Anyway, carbohydrates, again, fuel source and building blocks to some degree, but mostly like that quick energy fuel source. That's our fight or flight. That's maintaining our blood sugar so our brain can function, all kinds of things. So those big macronutrients, but then the micronutrients like calcium and your other electrolytes that help your nerves to function and fire. All the building blocks that, calcium and potassium, all of those other, iron and all the micronutrients that we need for building up our body and performing certain functions within our body. Super important that we get all of that. If we don't, that's when we see problems.
Well, it's interesting because it ends up being this extra problem because when we don't get the nutrients that we need, we don't function as well. And like Cameron said, our brain particularly, sugar and fats, it needs to function properly. And so when we're not getting enough of those, and then the electrolytes, right? So can it fire? Can it do all those things? We're going to be less motivated to take on food that's actually going to help us feel better and work better. And so staying ahead of that curve ends up being really important.
Yeah. And
I think in considering the building blocks, obviously, as we always say, if you can get it from a whole foods diet, that's going to be the best. The composition of, like, let's say fruits and vegetables, their skin is going to have fiber. It's going to have some of those micronutrients in them. And just the way that nature has created it tends to work the best with our bodies in terms of absorbing it and utilizing it and not just peeing or pooping a bunch out, to put it straight. I think another thing to think about when we're considering the energy inside of the equation, right? What are we taking into our bodies? Is thinking about the storage mechanisms that our body has for those different nutrients. And so let's talk fat, right? Basically limitless storage for fat on our bodies.
So much.
Which is really incredible. You look at some of those, obviously TLC loves the shows like that, right? My 600-Pound Life or whatever. But you look at some of the individuals on the extreme end, and obviously the life quality is very poor, but still the body can stay alive with even massive amounts of fat. It's very effective at storing fat. Muscle or protein, right? It's not just in muscle, right? There's so much of our body that's built and managed by proteins.
And utilizes proteins.
Right, our bones, our blood.
Well, the way our DNA works and encodes into RNA and then uses RNA to express the different genes and perform different functions in our body. It's all facilitated by proteins and amino acids and peptides made by those amino acids anyway, it's all like proteins are used throughout the entire body, just like fats are, way more than we realize.
Oh yeah, super important. Again though, main storage mechanisms, bone and muscle. And the nice thing about muscle is that it can actually store some of our fatty acids, and it's also a great storage mechanism for extra sugar, extra glucose. And so our body's really good at storing those two major macronutrients. The body has a very limited amount of storage available for pure carbohydrate, right? It stores it as glycogen in our liver and our muscles. The excess that it can't use, that ends up going towards fat stores. And so I think that, like, when we're looking at that composition of our diet, obviously carbohydrates are important. We need them for energy. We need them for our brain really likes them for that quick energy. But in terms of like that being the large majority of our diet, we just don't have a place to store it well. And so while we need it and while it's important, it probably shouldn't be the primary macronutrient in our diet, but it often is with the standard American diet.
Well, especially simple carbohydrates.
Simple, yeah.
So, like, you might think a lot of vegetables and other things like that are carbohydrate because they are plant-based and stuff like that. But there's definitely a difference between a simple carbohydrate and a more complex carbohydrate. So vegetables do have carbohydrates in them. They also have all of the other, macronutrients. A lot of our vegetables they're leaner in fat, but do have a lot of at least amino acids as well as protein in a lot of our fruits and vegetables. And so that's the thing, that eating the variety of foods. And so part of why we wanted to bring this topic up at this time of year, especially, so we're around the holiday time, is our food choices tend to be a little more impulsive. This time of year, we get a lot of what we call it Christmas crack, right? All of the gifts from neighbors and friends and stuff like that. It's delicious, but dangerous in terms of how we feel, and whether or not we're getting those building blocks in. And so it's often the season where we get derailed from our fitness plan. It's often the season where we see a lot of injuries for those who are trying to push through. And a lot of that has to do with our nutrition. We're not fueling our body right. We don't feel very well because the light is changing, so it's dark and things like that. That factors into it. But we're fueling our body poorly, and then if we're still exercising, or because we're not fueling our body well and we feel crappy, we're not exercising. And so it's just a tough time of year. And so we wanted to re-emphasize how making sure you're eating a variety of real whole foods is important and can lead not only to how we feel poorly, but it can lead to injury and problems there. So much of bone stress injuries, for example, tendon injuries, they're linking more and more to our diet than they are to overuse or overloading. That they found that it's actually a big part of that is just not taking proper recovery, and a big part of that recovery is not fueling our body with enough of those building blocks to rebuild in time to hit it again the next day. And so much of our major injuries that we see in sport or activity really are a nutrition problem at their foundation.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about this before on our call about protein, but the recommended daily allowance is 0.8 grams per kilogram. What studies have found that it needs to be for active adults is more between like 1.3 to 1.6 seems to bear out the most in the research. And the majority of Americans are probably not getting close enough to that optimal function level. Again, the same thing with fats. Do we need that to repair? And so if we're just not getting enough overall calories, or those calories are not very nutrient dense, then we're going to miss out on those major things that we need to build healthy bones, healthy muscles,
right,
healthy nervous systems. And so it ends up being crucial that we fuel our bodies in a way that's going to allow for that and going to allow for the recovery that Cameron talked about. Because that's always the flip side. We say that the only training that matters is training that you can recover from. And for sure that involves rest, that involves sleep, but nutrition is a huge part of that. And if we're not getting proper nutrition, then we just aren't recovering well. And so it ends up unraveling all of the things that we did to stimulate those adaptations, all that training that we did to kind of go towards this outcome. It ends up unraveling that.
Well, and so to that point of are we getting enough protein in and things like that, one of the things that we see is those people that are getting enough protein often aren't getting them from whole food sources. So like getting enough protein from a bunch of fried chicken where you're getting a ton of fat, fried carbohydrates, and a big protein load, but in a way that your macronutrients you're getting plenty of all three categories, but your micronutrients in something like that, in a heavily processed food like that, very few micronutrients that you need to stay healthy for your immune system to function and all those other things. So that's a big problem that we see in hyperpalatable foods that we tend to indulge in around this time of year, is that they may have great macronutrient density, but they're lacking severely in the micronutrient density. So the things that keep us healthy and provide those building blocks to be able to live well and have our body function well and things like that. And so that's one of those key things that we really need to focus on, and why eating a variety of whole foods really is so important in keeping us healthy, keeping us injury free, and avoiding illness, injury, and especially long term illness. Is making sure that we're getting enough of those micronutrients so that we're filling out the rest of our body's needs. And we've talked about this before, but how supplementation with like a multivitamin and things often just doesn't cut it, because it's a bolus of it one time in the day, passes through our system really quick, may or may not be absorbed very well. In fact, typically not absorbed great. Multivitamins aren't. And you may get this huge bolus of vitamin B6 or whatever at this one part of the day, and then it flushes through your system because the B vitamin is a water-soluble vitamin. You pee it out, what you didn't need right then, and then later that evening you may need more of that B6 for something that you're doing, and you don't have it because the rest of your diet didn't really make up for that, versus eating a variety of foods that gives you kind of this umbrella of all of the nutrients with every meal.
Yeah.
So,
well, and just I think it's all about what's sustainable. Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's the problem a lot of times is we're like, okay, wake up call, like I need to be eating better, I need to do this, and then just go and do something that's unsustainable, right? It's like either we're like, oh well, I guess I need to shift to only plants, and then that doesn't work, or we just feel so bad about it that we're like, you know what, I can't reach that. And so again, it's can I add in small, simple, sustainable practices and then just build on those over time.
Right. Trying to do a little bit better this year through the holidays than you did in past years.
Yeah.
And pick one thing to focus on. Like, I'm going to add some vegetables in every day that's going to help me feel more full. It's going to give me those, like I'm going to pick 2 vegetables a day that I'm going to try to add in, or something, whatever that is for
whatever
you.
Whatever the cue is, yeah.
Yeah.
And figuring it out, I've talked to a couple different people this week, and they said one of the things that they've tried is, okay, before I go and get this thing, I'm going to drink 20 ounces of water, or I'm going to ask myself, do I really want this right now? And just having that pause can be helpful. I bring this up a lot. The question that I've started asking myself is not, do I want this, or is this good or bad? It's just, is this going to fuel me well for activity, just generally going about my day, for exercise, and to recover well. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's still going to be the times it's like, oh, we're having a holiday party, like, yeah, I'm going to have a giant slice of that, whatever. Mm-hmm. But just putting that in the context of pie. Yeah, definitely pie. Pie's better than cake. I think we can definitely
agree.
Yeah.
I don't, is that even up for debate?
I don't think that's up for debate. But anyway, just thinking, what are some of these questions that I can ask myself around this area? Because this is so important, just our diet and exercise really end up being inseparable when we're talking about how do I build towards overall good health. Mm-hmm. When we're talking immune function, exercise and diet both affect that. Cognitive function, exercise and diet affect that. And so again, this is not going back to what we talked about on the call the other day. This superfood will boost your immune function through the roof, or this will change the way that you think. It's not so much any individual thing as that's why that Cameron said, what's the umbrella of the food choices that I'm having towards the day, and how does that contribute to my overall health? It's, do I have at least a basic level of good nutrition? Then that's going to cover most of the bases. And so again, it's not any one food or one micronutrient that I was super powerful. It was just that I got to this basic level that's going to allow me to not just survive, but thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess the reason why that image of the umbrella worked in my mind is I imagine like the macronutrients. Imagine the panels of an umbrella, and the macronutrients are like big panels on the umbrella. But if you only have those 3 panels, and then the other panels are made up of maybe a bunch of little strips that fill in the other things, like you're still going to get wet, right? Like those things that are kind of attacking our body are still going to hit us if we only have 3 panels of an umbrella. And so all of those other macronutrients really help keep us safe. And so that kind of concept of we have to build the whole umbrella within at least a few days, we've got to make sure we're getting in all of those different nutrients that we need, so that our body has them available to us when we need them. And so it just really in two key areas, I think, in kind of summing up what we're talking about, is injury avoidance and through being able to have the building blocks that we need, and then the way we feel. Those two things really kind of sum it up. Do we feel well so that we have the energy that we need to be able to do the things that we're doing? And if we're lacking any of those macro or micronutrients, we're just not going to feel our best. And consistency is going to fall out the window. And consistency, as we've talked about so many times, is where success really happens. And then if we just don't have those building blocks, things fall apart. And injury risk is much higher, and our consistency drops. And whenever our consistency drops, our injury rates go up and our success rates go down. And so those really are the big factors, and making sure we have the building blocks, making sure we feel well by what we're eating. And that, to me, is the big question I ask myself with it, is how is this going to make me feel? You mentioned that, like the question you're asking yourself lately about food, is, do I really want this? Mine lately has been, how's this going to make me feel? Am I going to feel better, more energized? Am I going to feel neutral? Or is this going to make me feel crappy? Like when I eat fried foods, I just don't feel well.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's probably not worth it to me, even though some of them taste really good.
Like fried turkey for Thanksgiving that we had? Delicious.
Yeah. And so, like, it just, you have to find what are those questions, what are those motivations, and what's worth it to you, I guess. And ask yourself, like, what's going to help me feel my best, perform my best, and in the end be most consistent so that I can be successful. And whatever that goal is, whatever that kind of mantra you tell yourself about your health and wellness, of like, I'm doing this for my grandkids, or I'm doing this for X, Y, or Z, like, what helps you be able to get there the best. And so that's why nutrition is just so critical. Is it is the foundation of our bodies being able to do all the things that it needs to do.
All right. Okay. Well, we will plan on seeing you on our next call on Monday.
Yep.
Thanks for joining today.
Yep, we got it.
Thanks for listening to the Becoming Body Smart podcast. If you have questions, thoughts, or want to continue the conversation, reach out to us on our socials or join our community. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more valuable content. Remember, sustainable health is a lifelong journey, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Live longer, live stronger, and become body smart.